this month. Our top three issues for August 2025 are: one, Donald Trump's assault on the federal government; two, dramatically deteriorating US economic governance; three, the story of Alaska and Washington, D.C. summits. Glenn, over to you. Donald Trump's assault on the federal government. The floor is yours.
Now, each of the topics that you so briefly touched upon, and I'm not being facetious, is are in and of themselves worthy of tremendous, intense focus. They are all very important, and I think, as all of us can see and know, and should be alarmed by, concerned about, we are living the most significant time historically since World War II. There are just phenomenal changes occurring in international relations, in the relative conduct of rules followed or ignored by international governance, in economic structures and organization, technological developments which have economic and sociological consequences. It's just astounding, really, what we are living. And the one I will talk about to start, for all of the apprehensions of media and opponents of Donald Trump and supporters of Donald Trump, I think remains largely misunderstood, and more than that, ignored. People are not aware of the hugely significant, historically significant foundations and objectives of what Donald Trump's administration is doing to the federal government of the United States, which, because the United States remains the 900-pound or 400-kilo gorilla in the China shop, or to mix all sorts of metaphors, affects the entire world. So what's happening? And to start, as I always do, I'll look backwards. And by, I don't think I can say happy coincidence, nonetheless a remarkable one. One of my classmates, not an intimate, not a friend, but someone I knew a little, I'm sure he would not remember me from then, I don't believe, at Harvard 50 years ago and more, was a man named Grover Norquist. Grover Norquist, in political circles in the United States, is well known, although not a prominent figure in the media. Beyond that, he's not well known. And he has organized now for 50 years something called the Wednesday Morning Group. And that's a meeting every Wednesday morning of the prominent figures, several prominent figures in the Republican Party, to plan strategy. His objective was, and I'll quote Grover, well, at the time that we were classmates, he was widely considered a gadfly, good-natured irritant, and not someone to be taken particularly seriously. All of this was wrong, because Grover had
He's had the last laugh, Glenn. He's had the last laugh, Glenn.
Absolutely, absolutely. He had a clear objective, a very coherent ideology, which he has pursued as a true believer and a sincere one. And we are now living the consequences, or the realization of his lifelong work. And he is one of the significant figures in the last 50 years. And what is his objective? I'll quote Grover: "I do not want to abolish the government." And by government, he means the federal government of the United States. "I simply want to reduce it to the size where I can drag it into the bathroom and then drown it in the tub." Unquote. So we thought, ho, 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 this is, he's one of these zealots and so on. But I and many, many others made a mistake that moderate and rational people always do, which to find something out is to dismiss something that is so outlandish from the norm that it seems absurd. And most of the time that is correct, but in this instance, it was not correct. And that is the objective of the Trump administration. Now, Donald Trump has adopted this, embraced this, and is pursuing this with the talents and skills that he has. but he doesn't care really. However, the thinking people in his administration do. Yes, sorry, Atul.
Glenn, if I may, my conversations with a number of admittedly junior people in the Trump administration and those coming from the right, I meet them regularly to figure out how they think, and especially with a heritage background. They're very much fanatical. They're almost like your ancestors, the Puritans on the Mayflower. They believe in truth with a capital T. They believe government is fundamentally a drag on the economy. Regulation has killed competitiveness in the US. Bureaucrats are leeches who live off taxes and are not productive. They believe that government should get out of the way. They very much venerate, even worship Ronald Reagan, who said that uh, government should get out of the way, should get off people's backs, and mocked, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. So they very much are ideological. They have a crusading zeal when it comes to limiting the footprint of the US federal government. So I can attest
Right,
to
right.
the belief systems of the younger people in the government.
Well, absolutely. And you anticipate, literally anticipate the exact next point that I was going to go from Grover
Yeah,
Norquist to the American Enterprise Institute, and in particular now the Heritage Foundation. When
yeah.
I was still working, the roles in some sense were reversed. The AEI was far more conservative and the Heritage Foundation far more moderate. That is reversed now, but that doesn't really matter. And their objective is that small government is good and government is the ill. If to simplify all of this historical background, it's fundamental. We could imagine, and I'll be disparaging and facetious, but also accurate. Imagine the Republican theoreticians as adolescents who have suffered arrested development and remain obsessed by Ayn Rand and the Fountainhead. She is the goddess, just about, of their philosophy, which is that government's in the way. If you can't help yourself, you should fail and die, and everyone else should have very sharp elbows and take care of themselves. And that exalts freedom, and government is by definition oppressive. That's it. That's their objective.
But she
Yes,
was
sorry.
coming from her background. She came from a communist background. She was reacting, as was Milton Friedman, to their own Eastern European slash Russian slash Soviet roots. And they did not have the Anglo-Saxon tradition of democracy, of rule of law, of debate and discussion. So they immediately reacted to anything to do with government. And Ayn Rand, for all her libertarianism, was actually quite authoritarian in running her cult. In fact, she made her husband wear bells on his shoes so that he wouldn't disturb her and her much younger lover.
Right. So the background is Grover Norquist, not alone, but he has been the most successful and focused and driven, and around him has cohered and been coordinated this philosophical movement, which is quite coherent, uh, as expressed by the intellectuals in the Heritage Foundation, in particular, in recent years. What is their goal? Their goal is, and I quote, to reduce the size of the federal government by 50%. The only roles that the federal government of the United States should have are national defense, which means the military, and border security. So does any of this ring any bells? Well, it certainly should. So what has happened as a result of this philosophical background and objective now making policy for the Republican Party and Donald Trump? Well, we've seen a broad attack in the 6 months or eight, whatever, 7 months of the second Trump administration on the federal government. 150,000 federal employees have been fired in the past 6 months. That's about 6% of the federal workforce. Entire agencies have been eliminated and gutted. The U.S. Agency for International Development is essentially killed. The Department of State has
USAID.
suffered USAID has suffered
Yes.
substantial reductions in personnel. The Directorate of National Intelligence and the intelligence community, the same. The CIA is talking about a reduction in force, which means eliminating about 25% of its employees. The Federal Emergency Management Administration, called FEMA, which responds to hurricanes, disasters, floods, forest fires, human disasters anywhere in the country, is in turmoil and is being decimated. Or decimated literally only means 1/10 killed, and so it will be much more than decimated. The National Institutes of Health is being gutted. The Center for Disease Control is being gutted. NASA's budget is proposed to be 50% lower than its previous budget. Research and development via federal money going to universities and other institutions, private and public, is dramatically down, which serves a double ideological objective of reining in, cowing, controlling, destroying the woke, liberal, elite intellectuals on the coasts, who are, by definition, the foils and the enemy of the true Americans and the Republican Party and the small government believers, and the populists, who are inseparable from this whole movement. And then the 2026 budget proposal, the current budget proposal of the Trump administration, is a 22.6%. So let's call it a 1/4 reduction in size. Now, the budget has not been passed yet, but that's the proposal on the table. So if the objective is 50%, you don't go from 0 to 50. You go from 0 to 1 to 2 to 3 to 22.6%, and then you carry on. Now, why is this happening? The objective is not only to reduce the size of the federal government by 50%, but at the same time to make the United States government radically different in its functions and its organization. And this gets back to something I've touched on before, which is called the theory of unitary executive power, which was first developed explicitly in the modern era by Carl Schmitt, who was the lawyer for Adolf Hitler and for Nazi Germany, whose view is that anything that challenges the authority and the agency of the chief executive must be eliminated or destroyed. The chief executive must have all authority. That's a dictatorship. Let me quote from Project 2025, which is the doctrinal, philosophical, and policy guidebook for the Trump administration. Quote, the entire executive branch must be brought under direct presidential control. That's radically different than the system of government that has evolved in the United States explicitly with intent, which is to have a government of laws where agencies and administrative organizations of the government are mandated by law and Congress and the executive, as the laws are passed, to carry out their missions according to various legislation, independent of any individual or any one part of the government, independent of the executive. Unitary executive theory will eliminate that and give all power to the White House. And as I said, the government only has two functions under this theory, which is national defense, and there the budget proposal is up, I think, 9%. At the same time that the overall budget is going down 21/4, and border control. And we've had hundreds of thousands of people, I forget the exact number, but it's in the hundreds of thousands of illegal aliens who have been detained, held, and expelled from the United States. And that is just, as the administration says, the beginning of what they intend to do. They've talked before during the campaign of deporting 13 million people in the United States, which is 5%, 4% of the population, or something to that effect. So the goal and the result of all of this, I'll quote from an unimpeachable source, Merriam-Webster. What is fascism? Fascism is a populist political philosophy, a movement or a regime that exalts the nation and often a race above the individual, and that is associated with a centralized autocratic government headed by a leader, they say a dictatorial leader, that is characterized by severe economic and social regimentation and by forcible suppression of opposition. Pardon me for doing this, but I have been warning about this in public for well over a decade. I was contending with, as were many, of course, many people in the government with these specific initiatives and efforts over 20 years ago during the first Bush administration, when the unitary executive theory of power was starting to be pushed for and implemented by the office of the vice president, then Richard Cheney. And this is what is happening, why the assault of the Trump administration is not incoherent. It is not irrational. One can actually support it if one thinks that those are the right ways to organize a government. But it is revolutionary in a literal sense in the United States. I find it appalling and terrifying. 80 million people were killed as a result of movements of this sort 80 years ago in a hideous war. And that is what is happening, which leads us, terribly, but logically enough, to our next topic, which is the deteriorating ways that the United States economic levers of power administration are organized and run. And with that, I will not happily, but sadly, turn over the what do they call the fascistic
the baton
the
or
fasces,
baton, as you say,
the fasces to Atul, who knows something about centralized economic control from his entire life.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.